And the Emmy goes to Helen Mirren, Elizabeth I.
This is the third Emmy win and 9th nomination for Helen Mirren.
Hollywood loves to tell itself that it is forever young. It builds palaces out of light, freezes time in close-ups, and refuses to admit that even a legend must one day walk more slowly through a doorway. Few stars have stared that myth in the face, and then smiled quite like Helen Mirren. She is the sovereign of steel-spined women, the rebel in silk, the working-class daughter who became a global emblem of poise. We remember the thunder of her command as a detective who would not be talked over, the hush that fell when she stepped into a crown, the shock of seeing a woman past middle age refuse to disappear when the script said she should. But time, for all its elegance, still exacts a toll. At 80, the applause echoes differently. The industry that adored her insists on calling her feisty, as if power in an older woman must be made cute to be tolerated. The same camera that once could not look away now turns to younger faces that have not yet learned the price of being photographed. And somewhere between the ovations and the quiet kitchens of mourning, a more complicated truth waits. The tragedy is not that Helen Mirren grew old, it is that the world keeps trying to make oldness a wound. This is not a tabloid story. It is the reckoning of a life lived at full height. It is about a child who learned to speak with Shakespeare in her mouth, a woman who rose through theaters that did not know where to set her, an artist who endured the centuries-old suspicion of female authority and then wore authority like a perfectly tailored coat. What did that victory cost? What did the crown weigh when the lights turned off? And why, after decades of proof, does Hollywood still need reminding that radiance does not retire?
You guys, you dated at one point.
Helen and I?
Yes.
Yes, darling.
Yes.
We didn't date, we lived together.
She was born Helen Lydia Mirrenoff on a July morning in 1945, a child of war's long shadow. London had stopped burning, but the city still wore its bruises. Her father, Vasily, who would later anglicize his name to Basil Mirren, carried the weight of an exile's history. His father before him had served with distinction in Imperial Russia. Revolution redrew the map and redefined loyalty. In England, the Mirrenoffs rebuilt themselves with stubborn immigrant patience. Her mother, Kathleen, was English and practical, with the sort of humor that can lower a fever in a room. Helen grew up between legacies. On one side, the sweep of Russian memory, deep with music and formality. On the other, the clipped, resilient common sense of post-war Britain. She learned thrift without shame and aspiration without apology. There were not the privileges of aristocracy, no private chauffeurs, no velvet ropes always opened, but there was a rich pedagogy of attention. Books mattered, manners mattered, curiosity was praised, and somewhere in that little house, a girl felt the door of language swing open. School was not merely a schedule of lessons, it was a stage with chalk dust for glitter. In convent classrooms and municipal auditoriums, she discovered that the voice, properly aimed, could move a crowd as surely as a violin. Shakespeare arrived early, not as a museum piece but as a living argument. Poetry taught control, plays taught courage. The education was neither gilded nor easy. It was public, disciplined, occasionally strict in the old way, yet unexpectedly liberating for a girl who understood instinctively that words could be shelter, sword, and passport. In those years, she also met the British weather of class, the damp that seeps under doors no matter how tight you stuff the towel. Acting, to middle-class parents, was not a profession so much as a flirtation with disappointment. Sensible people did something else. Helen, sensible in her own fashion, concluded that she would have to make her sensibility pay. She watched people closely. The way adults adjusted their shoulders when pretending not to be offended. The way a teacher's mouth thinned before a rebuke. The way kindness always seemed to find a physical posture. She was already collecting a gallery of women she would one day portray. The overworked headmistress who loves a lost cause. The queen who understands that dignity is armor, the grandmother who will never accept the word retired. The National Youth Theatre arrived like a thunderclap. Imagine a hall full of teenagers who think language is an extreme sport, who stay up too late talking about breath control and subtext, who would rather spend a summer in rehearsal than on a beach. Helen entered and recognized her tribe. Those early productions, sweaty, underfunded, electric, gave her something no textbook could: proof that an audience is a living, breathing instrument, and that her hands knew already how to play it. Cleopatra would soon become one of her first banners, not because of the costumes or the flirtations, but because the role demanded a woman who could be contradictory without apology. That is to say, a woman. The home front, meanwhile, taught sturdier lessons. There is a particular pride in families who do not expect the world to make room for them. Helen learned to iron a blouse to within an inch of its life, to be on time, to show up prepared, to repay kindness, to stop complaining and fix what could be fixed. Years later, when journalists were dazzled by her sudden international fame, she seemed bemused. Sudden? The only thing sudden about endurance is the headline it eventually earns. And if there was any early sorrow, it was the old, quiet sorrow of being misunderstood by well-meaning people. She did not dream of being a star. She dreamed of doing the work so well that it would shut the room up. To be taken seriously, truly, not condescendingly, was the wish sewn into every hem.
Mom, I'm not the Queen.
Listen, I like to be called governor or the boss. I don't like ma'am, I'm not the bloody Queen, so take the pick.
And it was through
The theater claimed her first. Before billboards, before global press tours, there was the discipline of rehearsal rooms where immortality smells like dust and coffee. She moved through repertory like a woman testing doors. The Royal Shakespeare Company, imposing, tradition-heavy, not always welcoming to audacity, became a crucible. If the company sometimes preferred its heroines either ethereal or obedient, Helen's imagination insisted on women who thought faster than the men around them and did not apologize for it. She learned to bring heat without noise, to let a character's intelligence flicker in the eyes before it ever arrived in the text. Those seasons were a seminar in stamina. Classical roles ask for a body that can carry language as if it were a weight and a wing at the same time. Night after night, she learned to land I-ams like punches and caresses, to negotiate the delicate politics of companies where praise is rationed and hierarchy is invisible but felt, to find, beneath the costume, a pulse that belongs only to the woman on stage. A younger actress might have been content to be admired. Helen wanted complicity with the audience. She wanted that silent contract. I will show you what you didn't know you recognized. Cinema came calling with its very different instruments. A lens cares for a secret, in ways a balcony never can. Her early films were not yet the coronations to come, but they announced a sensibility that refused to be tidied up. In British crime tales and myth-scorched epics, in modern fables and risky art house provocations, she kept choosing material that would not let the viewer settle into easy judgments. Beauty could be a trap, charisma could curdle, virtue could be tedious, and power was almost always a negotiation conducted in a whisper. Television, too, opened an unexpected door and would later become one of the pillars of her legend. Before it was fashionable for great stage actors to lead series, before streaming promised prestige to every well-lit frame, she gambled on characters built not for a single evening, but for years of evolving weather. The woman she found there was unlike the tidy female detectives audiences had been taught to expect. She was brilliant and abrasive, wounded and relentless, tender in private, ruthless in rooms where softness would be misread. The cultural impact would be seismic, but at the beginning it was a risk, a bet that the world might be ready for a heroine who did not smile to make you comfortable. Those first on-screen decades were also a masterclass in surviving an industry that treats women's faces like milk, with an expiration date stamped on the carton. Helen did not bargain with time. She bargained with truth. Instead of playing younger, she played sharper. Instead of begging for roles that offered flattery, she hunted roles that offered conflict. Even the lighter turns caper-o-bright action, Glossy biographical dramas, wry comedies with an adult's bite, were chosen for the specific pleasure of watching a woman insist on agency in genres that had not been built for her. Through it all, she kept a private discipline, to keep the work clean, to keep the life sane. Fame is a solvent. It can strip the paint from furniture you did not realize was antique. She built routines, reading, walking, cooking, the revision of a line until it fits the mouth like a talisman that would hold under pressure. Friends learned that beneath the glamour was a highly practical creature who did not confuse attention with affection. Directors learned that she could be directed, but not diminished. Young actors learned, simply by watching, that authority can be quiet, and that quiet is not the same thing as small. And yet, in every green room, the whisper traveled, "She is extraordinary, but will the cameras love her as much as the critics do?" The question was less about talent than about appetite. Did the mass audience want a woman who looked at them with appraisal rather than petition? The answer would arrive, decisively, in the years ahead first, like a crack of thunder over British television, then, like a coronation march, across the world's biggest stages.
Finding your love,
For years, Helen Mirren had been that shimmering paradox. Admired, but not yet consecrated. Formidable, yet not yet crowned. The moment of breakthrough did not come from a single flashbulb, but from a steady, unrelenting climb. Then suddenly, the world noticed. It began with the stage. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, she was no longer simply a promising member of the National Youth Theatre or a brave recruit of the Royal Shakespeare Company. She had become a woman audiences anticipated. Cleopatra at Stratford had already scandalized and electrified in equal measure. Reviewers spoke of her sexuality and audacity in tones usually reserved for disasters or revelations. She was not polite on stage. She was alive, and that fact was both thrilling and unnerving. Film critics began to wonder if such intensity could survive the transition to screen. In a series of roles throughout the 70s Age of Consent, oh lucky man. Caligula, she proved not only that it could survive, but that the camera often deepened what theater had first suggested. She could be languid one moment, vicious the next. Innocence and calculation seemed to occupy the same glance. Directors alternately adored and feared her, recognizing that Mirren did not disappear into roles so much as expand them until they threatened to eclipse the very script. But it was not until the 80s and 90s that Helen Mirren moved from admired actress to cultural institution. The role of Detective Chief Inspector Jane Tennyson in Prime Suspect was her decisive coronation. The British public, and soon after the world, sat stunned before a police drama that had dared to anchor itself on a middle-aged woman who was brilliant, abrasive, vulnerable, and utterly uninterested in softening herself for comfort. Over 7 seasons stretching across more than a decade, Mirren's Tennyson aged on screen, revealing wrinkles, weariness, and brilliance with equal clarity. It was a gamble in an industry addicted to youthful polish, but it became an epoch-defining event. She won multiple BAFTAs and Emmys. More importantly, she redefined what television heroines could be. Journalists pressed her to talk about being a role model. She deflected. To her, Jane Tennyson was not a crusade but a reality. Women like that existed, why should they not exist on screen? Yet the cultural effect was seismic. Female police officers wrote to thank her. Young actresses suddenly saw a path where there had been none. Audiences who had dismissed women detectives as novelties began to understand complexity as entertainment. Hollywood, long skeptical of British theatre royalty, unless it could be safely romanticized, finally extended its full embrace. Mirren navigated arthouse films, period dramas, and mainstream hits with equal skill. She entered projects like The Madness of King George and Gosford Park with surgical precision, bringing sly intelligence to roles that might have been dismissed as historical ornaments. She gave voice to queens, duchesses, and ordinary women, each marked by an undertow of will. By the time she donned the crown in The Queen, 2006, it seemed inevitable. playing Elizabeth II in the aftermath of Princess Diana's death, required a delicate blend of restraint, authority, and invisible fracture. Mirren delivered it so flawlessly that for a season she seemed to merge with the monarch herself. The role earned her the Academy Award, and with it, a final seal. She was not merely an actress of stature, she was a sovereign presence in cinema. Behind these triumphs lay conflicts often invisible to the audience. She had long battled a press obsessed with her appearance. Interviews in the 70s and 80s often reduced her to a sex symbol, a label she detested. Journalists famously asked invasive, even insulting questions, as if her willingness to portray sensuality on screen were permission to trivialize her craft. Mirren pushed back with candor and wit, once publicly skewering a talk show host for his fixation on her figure rather than her artistry. These confrontations became part of her legend, the actress who refused to be patronized, who insisted that respect was not optional. And yet, behind the victories lay exhaustion. The industry rewarded her daring but often failed to protect her from its cruelties. She endured projects that collapsed under poor direction, colleagues who resented her authority, critics who weaponized her frankness. Each award, each headline was double-lidged, proof of survival, but also reminder that survival was demanded again and again. Her breakthrough then was not a single explosion, but a sustained campaign. Stage to screen, Britain to Hollywood, serious drama to international prestige, each was a battle won at cost. By the early 2000s, Helen Mirren was no longer asked if the camera would love her. She was asked instead whether the camera could imagine existing without her. The tragedy beneath the triumph was that even in victory, she had to keep proving that a woman past middle age could carry not only a role, but an entire industry's attention. It was a victory that felt like a war still being fought. The golden era of Helen Mirren stretched across decades rather than a single epoch. Unlike stars who burn bright and vanish, she cultivated longevity, yet longevity in Hollywood carries its own paradoxes. To the public, she became both timeless and timely, the glamorous grande dame on red carpets, the uncompromising actress who still took risks, the unexpected action star in films like Red, the Oscar-winning queen who could still surprise by showing up in a raucous comedy sketch. Magazines hailed her as proof that beauty could thrive past 50, 60, 70. Photographers lingered on her gowns. Critics marveled at her ease. She became a fashion icon for older women, a sort of ambassador for dignity without apology. Yet beneath the applause was a more complicated narrative. Every photograph carried the silent burden, "Look how well she has aged." Praise meant to be flattering often felt like a reminder that the culture expected decay. Hollywood's gaze remained fickle. For every celebrated role, there were scripts she never even saw because her age was considered disqualifying. Casting directors still whispered about marketability, as if audiences had not already embraced her again and again. The industry both honored her and betrayed her, elevating her on award nights, then sidelining her when younger, more malleable faces appeared. Her public image became that of defiance. She spoke openly about refusing plastic surgery, about choosing to age visibly. She laughed at the term sexy at 70, pointing out the absurdity of treating sexuality as a shocking survival. Her interviews blended humor with steel. She could disarm with a smile, then deliver a sentence that dismantled decades of sexism in one breath. To fans, she was liberating. To detractors, she was difficult. Film after film reinforced her reputation. The Last Station earned her another Oscar nomination. Hitchcock, Trumbo, Catherine the Great, and a dozen more showcased her range. She could play monarchs and mob bosses, wives and warriors, each with the same precision, a woman fully herself, never an accessory. And yet, the tragedy glimmered in the margins. Each peak carried with it the echo of exclusion. She had proven that brilliance could outlast youth, but the very need to prove it again and again was itself heartbreaking. The applause was real, but so was the fatigue of an industry that insisted she fight for ground that should long ago have been secured. The irony of success is that it often masks the cost of its own achievement. For Helen Mirren, the cracks did not appear as scandalous meltdowns or lurid tabloid exposés. They emerged in quieter ways, sometimes more devastating because they lacked spectacle. The first was exhaustion. By the time she reached her 60s, the sheer relentlessness of proving herself had worn grooves in her spirit. Each new project, each interview carried a familiar burden to prove yet again that she was still relevant, still radiant, still capable. Youthful actors could fail without consequence. For her, failure threatened to confirm what skeptics always whispered, that her era had passed. Hollywood, though it loved to parade her as an icon, was still a place built on the cult of youth. Opportunities thinned even as accolades multiplied. Scripts leaned toward stereotypes, the grandmother dispensing wisdom, the dowager queen, the witty cameo. She accepted some and refused others, but every decision became a negotiation between integrity and visibility. Behind closed doors, she wrestled with the quiet insult of invisibility, the calls not returned, the directors who loved her work but chose younger names, the studios that saw her as a risk despite decades of proven box office success. The press, too, remained double-edged. Praise often arrived, cloaked in condescension. Headlines blared, "Sexy at 60," as though the phrase itself were an astonishment. Fashion magazines marveled at her courage to wear a bikini in her 60s, as if existing in her body were an act of rebellion. Mirren laughed publicly, dismissing the absurdity. But in private, there was weariness. Why must her body be the battlefield on which culture fights its war with age? Personal health also became a looming shadow. Though she has remained admirably vigorous, the body inevitably records time's passage. Long shooting schedules taxed her stamina. Injuries lingered longer. Recovery was slower. Friends noted that she often seemed more fatigued, though she refused to indulge self-pity. Publicly, she brushed aside concerns, but those closest to her saw the toll. Even her legendary confidence sometimes cracked under the weight of chronic aches, sleepless nights, and the knowledge that the camera is merciless with time. Financial struggles never defined her in the way they destroyed some of her peers, but she knew the instability of the acting life. Projects collapsed. Scripts she had committed to lost funding, and in several instances, she accepted roles less for artistic fulfillment than to maintain security. Such choices weighed on her. To carry the crown in one film and then appear in a light, forgettable role in another. Audiences adored her regardless, but critics were occasionally cruel, labeling her uneven or suggesting that she had compromised. She understood, perhaps too well, that survival in Hollywood was sometimes less about purity than about endurance. There were also private losses. Friends of her generation faded away, some to illness, some to anonymity, some to death. Each funeral reminded her of fragility. Each obituary a reminder that the world forgets quickly. The tragedy was not that she had outlived so many contemporaries, but that she often felt like one of the last warriors on a battlefield that had already been abandoned. Perhaps the most profound struggle lay in her relationship with Hollywood's hypocrisy. She had spent a lifetime proving that women could command the screen at any age, yet she still encountered a system that resisted. Awards were plentiful. True equality remained elusive. She once observed that women were still too often praised for resilience rather than simply recognized for talent. To be resilient implied that one had survived blows that should never have been struck. That insight summed up her tragedy. Her triumphs were often measured by how gracefully she endured injustice. As she approached 80, these struggles crystallized. The roles grew rarer, the spotlight more selective, the applause tinged with nostalgia. To the public, she remained a symbol of grace and power. To herself, she was an artist, still hungry, still restless, still irritated by the condescension of being called remarkable for her age. The tragedy was not personal failure but cultural blindness, the refusal of the world to accept that age is not a wound but a testament. Behind the stage lights, Helen Mirren lived a personal life filled with love, complexity, and shadows seldom glimpsed. She never fit neatly into the Hollywood mold of tabloid romance or domestic spectacle. Her most enduring partnership has been with American director Taylor Hackford, whom she met in the mid-1980s. They married in 2007 after more than 2 decades together. To the world, this was a fairy tale. 2 artists united across oceans. In reality, it was also a story of compromise, sacrifice, and distance. Mirren never had children, a choice she has discussed candidly. In interviews, she admitted she never felt a maternal calling, though she endured years of questions, judgment, and speculation. Society seemed unable to accept that a woman's legacy could be artistic rather than biological. She answered with characteristic candor, once saying she had no maternal instinct whatsoever. Yet the judgment stung. In the quiet of her private life, she often reflected on the loneliness imposed by those expectations. Friends who became mothers drifted into lives she could not fully share. Holidays sometimes emphasized absence rather than abundance. The tragedy lay not in regret, but in the unrelenting pressure to justify a personal decision. Her marriage, though enduring, was not without strain. Hackford's career often pulled him in different directions, and their long stretches apart tested patience. The compromises required of 2 ambitious artists sometimes meant loneliness within union. Arguments over time, distance, and career choices were inevitable. Still, Mirren valued loyalty above comfort, and the relationship survived where others might have collapsed. Yet the scars remained, the knowledge that even great love is rarely free from pain. She has spoken about her struggles with shyness, surprising to those who see only her confidence. Crowds sometimes drained her. Interviews often felt invasive. The public saw glamour, but she often longed for quiet anonymity. She retreated into hobbies, gardening, reading, painting to steady herself. These moments of solitude were not indulgences, but lifelines. Still, they also reminded her of isolation. Fame creates distance, and even the warmest applause cannot substitute for companionship untainted by recognition. There were darker shadows. In her early career, she endured the rampant sexism of the industry. Directors who treated her body as public property, journalists who dismissed her intellect, peers who reduced her to an image. She confronted it with wit and ferocity, but the wounds were real. Decades later, she could still recall the sting of being asked to justify her talent rather than simply display it. Each insult left sediment, shaping a woman admired for resilience, but privately weary of having to be resilient at all. Financial security did not shield her from emotional vulnerability. She experienced bouts of depression, moments when the glamour of success dissolved into emptiness. She has admitted to feelings of insecurity, of not being enough despite accolades. The paradox of fame haunted her. The louder the applause, the deeper the private silence sometimes felt. The hidden pain of Helen Mirren's life lies in the contradiction between public adoration and personal solitude. She became a symbol of strength, yet strength often meant swallowing sorrow unacknowledged. Fans saw the crown. She felt its weight pressing into her skull. The tragedy is not that she failed to live fully, but that she lived so fully in a world that so often refused to honor her humanity beyond performance. At 80, Helen Mirren remains luminous, but the light she casts is different. It is the glow of endurance, of an ember that has burned steadily rather than a flame that flickered out. She continues to act, to astonish, to appear in projects that remind the world that authority, wit, and sensuality do not belong exclusively to the young. Netflix's The Thursday Murder Club adaptation marks yet another chapter, proof that audiences still crave her presence. Yet her later years are tinged with melancholy. Public appearances emphasize her vitality, but behind the sparkle lies a recognition. Time is finite, and the industry will never truly relinquish its obsession with youth. She is invited to galas, honored at festivals, praised for still looking amazing. Each phrase conceals an elegy. The applause is affectionate, but tinged with farewell. Her legacy, however, is undeniable. She redefined the portrayal of women in film and television. She proved that queens could be vulnerable, detectives could be female and complex, and age could be embraced rather than concealed. Generations of actresses cite her as inspiration. Audiences continue to discover her work, astonished by the ferocity of a woman who never apologized for taking up space. The tragedy of Helen Mirren's later years is not failure, but the culture's refusal to accept her victories as permanent. She has already changed Hollywood. Yet Hollywood behaves as though it must be reminded every decade. Still, she persists, carrying herself with dignity, humor, and the unyielding belief that truth matters more than youth. When future historians of cinema look back, they will see more than an actress. They will see a woman who fought for visibility, who endured condescension, who carried the weight of being the exception until exceptions became precedents. They will see the tragedy of a culture that demanded resilience when respect should have been enough. Helen Mirren's story is not a neat morality tale. It is the saga of brilliance, forced to wrestle with blindness, of triumph shaded by sorrow, of a crown that shimmered but pressed hard upon the brow. At 80, she remains extraordinary, not because she has defied time, but because she has embraced it, worn it, and dared to demand that others see its beauty. The tragedy is not hers alone. It belongs to every woman who has been told she must justify her existence beyond a certain age. To every artist asked to prove again and again what should be obvious. To every human being reduced to a headline that marvels at their survival. Mirren is both unique and universal. A queen, a detective, a lover, a fighter, and always an artist. As the curtain falls on each performance, as the lights dim on each film set, the question lingers: why does a world that claims to celebrate greatness insist on measuring it by youth? What memory of Helen Mirren will endure for you, the queen in ermine, the detective with weary eyes, the woman who laughed at absurdity, or the private soul who simply longed to be seen without labels? Perhaps the answer is all of them. Perhaps that is her gift, to remind us that human beings, like roles, cannot be flattened into one dimension. Her legacy is not just in awards or titles, but in the defiance of reduction. Helen Mirren, at 80, stands as living proof that radiance does not retire, and in that truth lies both the triumph and the tragedy. So, as we remember her journey, let us ask ourselves, do we honor brilliance when it appears, or only when it resists erasure? And what does it say about Hollywood, about all of us, that we keep being surprised by the endurance of greatness? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories behind Hollywood's curtain.